The desire to create is a strong one, and often it pushes us to work extraordinarily long hours, to manage difficult things, and to push ourselves to the brink of our resilience. Artists often burn like comets, creating beauty as they themselves burn into nothingness. Burnout is a common state of being for artists. The same traits that maintain our excitement and work ethic have little awareness of our human needs. In this episode, we are talking about artistic burnout, but let's start, as we often do, with a functional definition. So what is it? Well, for our purposes today, let's define it as such. It is the state of mental, emotional, and/or physical exhaustion experienced by artists, and often stems from prolonged stress, overwork, or creative challenges. It is often characterized by fatigue, disillusionment, and a loss of desire or passion for creative endeavors. Artists experiencing burnout may struggle to find joy or satisfaction in their work, may feel uninspired or creatively depleted, and may struggle to maintain focus and concentration. Before we dive in, I think it is reasonable and healthy to acknowledge how difficult burnout is. It often strikes when we least expect it, or when it is the least convenient for it to do so. Know this, it is common. You are not a failure as an artist because you feel burnt out. This happens to lots of people, and there are lots of ways to work through it. Let's start by talking about causes, then we'll go into how to deal with burnout, and lastly, how to work on preventing it in the first place, if possible. No strategy is perfect, but once you know the problem, you are better equipped to deal with it. What are some of the most common causes for burnout in artists? I don't want to start with the negatives, but sometimes understanding the root cause of a thing that is troubling you can feel like a rope being handed to you as you dangle from the side of a cliff. It reminds you that there is a cause, that there is something that can be done about it. Perhaps the best cause to start with is overworking. We hear about burnout across professions and hobbies, and most of the time, this is the culprit. You have had too much on your plate, been balancing too many things, or are simply tired from all the work and can no longer find the will to do the things that you want to do. One of the biggest causes of this particular state comes from a lack of taking breaks. As small as it might seem, taking regular breaks can actually allow you to work for longer, to work better, and to be more regulated for a longer period of time. Overworking, however, is not a monolith. Though likely more complicated than I will make it here, I think it breaks into two major groups: being overworked when it comes to things outside of your art, and being overworked on your art itself. The first of these can be much harder to deal with. If your professional work, your family life, or health concerns have put you in a situation where they consume much of your time and energy, art can be difficult to engage in. Also, it's harder to take breaks from some of these things. I could bang my head against a wall for hours talking about the virtues of taking breaks at work, but not all jobs, and certainly not all supervisors and bosses, are open to the idea. If you work in the service industry, sometimes it can be difficult to even sneak your legally mandated breaks. If this extends to your family or to your personal health, it can be even more difficult. In most cases, you can escape work once you leave, but escaping yourself or your family is a much more difficult concept. Though this may sound cataclysmic, giving the illusion of the situations being terrible, it is often not the case. If you just started a new job and everything is great, it's still a huge burden to learn how to manage all the new aspects of the occupation. You have to concentrate more and work on metabolizing new information constantly. If you or your family have moved recently or are moving in the near future, that imparts a massive amount of stress and work. So it's not just terrible life situations that find you with the potential for burnout coming from your personal life. If you are burnt out from your art specifically, that's a different thing. Often you may find that doing the same thing over and over again artistically finally takes its toll. Maybe you're in school and all of your artwork feels like it is someone else's mandate. It's never what you want to work on. Or maybe you've put yourself in a situation where all your artwork is only what you want to work on, and you find yourself quite stressed because your expectations are incredibly high. These are some of the common reasons that you can run into burnout when it comes to your own artwork, imparting these things on you. For these reasons, overworking or finding yourself overworked is one of the easiest ways to find yourself on the path toward burnout. In some situations, it's hard to avoid, but knowing of the potentiality is the easiest way to slow your descent. Pressure is another very common way to find yourself burning out as an artist. Pressure is a funny catalyst though. as depending on who you are, you will likely deal with one of two kinds of pressure far more than the other: pressure from yourself or pressure from others. As artists, we often hold extremely high expectations for ourselves, expectations that we may have formed before we knew what we were getting ourselves into. Dreams are often one of the things that apply this pressure. If you have a desire to do something specifically from an artistic standpoint, that dream is going to naturally carry with it some level of expectations, desire, and pressure. If you want to work in the art industry, you want to be a concept artist for video games or for movies, there is a lot of work that goes into getting into that. And you've put yourself in a situation where you've applied this extraneous pressure, probably unknowingly. If you want to work in a local gallery, you want to have your artwork on display, but you really want to make a living being a potter, being a ceramicist, a painter, a drawer, whatever it might be, there are expectations that come along with those. And these expectations are likely self-applied, things that you have for yourself in your mind. You walk into a gallery, you look at the other people's work, and you go, mine's not on par yet. I need to improve. I need to get better so that I can do this. Dreams are a wonderful thing for artists. They are something that push us to achieve far more than we would naturally. And yet, they can also apply tremendous quantities of pressure, and that pressure can lead to burnout. Sometimes it's not a dream necessarily, it's just the desire to improve, the desire to fit in. Maybe they are kind of synonymous in a way, but they feel slightly different to me. You know, I have desires to improve my skills, to be able to draw certain kinds of things, to be able to paint in a certain kind of fashion, and I have dreams to produce specific things. So to me, they do feel rather unlinked. I can pursue a dream and feel like I'm meeting my expectations with that, while I also feel like I'm failing on my desires. And so the pressure from the two can kind of line up in a really terrible way, but it can also be divergent. You can be working on a single one of those and satisfying yourself, and then working on the other one and feeling like you are really far behind, you aren't meeting those expectations. Also, though, we're just humans, and we exist within community. And sometimes we perceive that others are applying pressure and expectations to us, and sometimes they actually are. Your parents and your family may have expectations for you career-wise that do not line up with what you want to do artistically. Ironically, you might even have artistic family, artistic parents, but they want you to follow in their footsteps, to be a painter like they were, like their parents were. And that's not really what you have in mind. You have a different pursuit. Though, frankly, this usually occurs in that your parents are afraid that if you become an artist, that you won't make any money and you'll be living in their basement until you're 67 years old, and that's just not what most parents are looking for their children. But that pressure gets applied by those extraneous people. Sometimes teachers can do this. Unfortunately, there are a lot of teachers in the world that feel like their students are a representation of them. Parents do this as well, probably much more frequently, but you do run into it with teachers, and it's often more devious because you don't expect it from a teacher. There were several professors that I heard about when I was at university. One in particular was a painting professor, and this teacher would not let a student leave their classroom without a painting that was adequate. And really what they meant by adequate was a painting that reflected well on them. So just chew on that for a second. You're sitting in this class, which was not an intro class, it was one level in, but only one level in. So you were, a late freshman or an early sophomore generally. And this teacher would not let you do something that they felt reflected poorly on them. I heard stories about this teacher ripping paintbrushes out of students' hands, fixing things on their canvas, yelling and swearing, and all kinds of things that, it was enough for me to avoid taking classes with that teacher in particular. I talked to some colleagues that I had later on that actually had taken classes with this particular professor, and they all kind of said the same thing. If you could deal with the emotional situation, you learned a lot. But for me, when I was really nervous and insecure about my artistic skills in my early 20s, the last thing I wanted was a teacher who was going to rip my piece away from me, fix it, and then death stare me and tell me that now I'm allowed to leave their classroom. Now I'm going to shine back on them in an appropriate way. That feels like a grave oversight. It's a lot of vicarious living through your student. It's just not a good trait. Even though this professor was a really good painter, that doesn't necessarily make you a good teacher. So sometimes teachers can do this to you. Sometimes role models do it to you, though this is a little bit strange and sometimes is more of an implied thing. You feel like a role model in your life would not approve of something you were doing. So it's kind of this weird mix of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation and pressure. You feel like, oh, if they really knew what I'm doing right now, they wouldn't approve of it, and so I need to do that. But I would try to keep in mind that if somebody hasn't voiced an actual concern with you yet, you don't necessarily need to put those things into their mouths. Pressure can make it so difficult to move forward on anything artistic. Often our brains get gunked up by too many thoughts, and whether that pressure is external or internal, it can lead to burnout in a hurry. Perfectionism. This thing is rearing its ugly head yet again. I actually have an entire video on perfectionism, so if you want to listen further, please go check that out. I'll link it below. In short, perfectionism can help you burn through your resources more quickly than you should. It kicks you back into things that are good enough so that you can perfect them. This sounds good on the surface, but it's hard to keep your emotions in a positive place when you feel like you can never allow yourself to move on to something new. Starting new things is exciting, but bottlenecking yourself into only working with perfect ideas or having to work on a piece until it is perfect will just dry up all of your motivation and excitement. Art is a process. It is built in stages. Ugly drawings exist for a reason, and part of that is to remind us that we are human, that we can't be perfect, and that it isn't even a good or reasonable goal. But perfectionism seems to wrap its ugly fingers around some of us in a terrible way. If this is you, I would highly recommend the episode on perfectionism, and I hope it can help you out in some small way. Sometimes burnout is almost the logical end when you fail to taste success. This looks differently for each of us. We each need different things emotionally from our artwork. These are some of the common ones that I've seen in my time working as an artist and teaching, though. Recognition, validation, support, or simply results. If you need recognition for your artwork and you are failing to get it, it can feel like there is no purpose in moving forward. Perhaps you have worked incredibly hard trying to impress a teacher or a parent, and no one recognizes your growth. Maybe you are failing to recognize your own growth, unable to step back and look at the work that you've produced over the last year and notice that, yes, you have in fact been growing and improving. A lack of recognition, if that is what you as a human need from your artwork, can burn through your motivation in a heartbeat. And if this is you and you feel like you aren't receiving the recognition, not necessarily that you deserve, because I think the humility is a good thing, but the recognition that you need as a human being just to continue working, I'm sorry. That's really, really hard. Not everyone finds themselves in a situation where they have support around them, where they have people who even understand. I mean, you might have a great set of parents, a good relationship with your family, but none of them get the artistic thing. And so they try to encourage you, they try to support you, but you kind of know in the back of your head that when mom says my drawings are good, like mom can't draw, mom doesn't have any artistic inclinations at all. So she's being kind and encouraging, but can I really take that compliment? Can I really take that recognition? I've certainly been in that situation, not necessarily with my mother, but I've been in that situation before where people have been like, oh, this painting is lovely. And I'm like, thank you. You don't know what you're talking about, but you're being really sweet. So if you are in a situation where you're not receiving the recognition that you want, even if it's just some feedback, I am sorry. That is a really hard thing. And sometimes it's okay and it's good just to acknowledge that it's hard. Perhaps you need validation for your artwork, for your time invested, or for the strength of your ideas. You want the people around you to simply encourage your continued pursuit of these things, to note them as being worthwhile or even worthy. If you have authorities in your life who have not been validating in the past, you may find yourself here, searching to just hear, it is okay for you to keep working on your art, to keep struggling. I ran into this a ton with my students over the years. Many of them needed to be validated in their concerns, their ideas, the pursuit of their work. They tried hard. Sometimes they succeeded, but often they failed. That's part of what learning is. These students cared less about the failure, though, and more about knowing that failure is natural, that it's normal, that your failure doesn't make you a failure. If you need to hear that today, then here it is. Your failing at a piece of work does not make you a failure as an artist, or more importantly, as a human being. For some, the burnout arrives simply because nothing has been completed. Maybe you, like me, get excited about new ideas very easily and you dive into new endeavors very quickly, often without putting in the necessary time or research to make sure that you can do it correctly. I find myself discouraged often when I dive into a new medium or a new topic, and of course, I struggle with it. When you approach a new thing, it's only natural to struggle, but my expectations for myself are often unnaturally high, and the only benefit I get from them is disappointment. And this is me, who's been working on this for 20 some odd years, and I know myself pretty well, and I have a pretty good understanding of how I function. But I still find myself getting into a new topic, and this might be like approaching drawing a particular kind of architecture for the first time. And I'm disappointed quickly because of my lack of progress. And part of what is confusing here too is that, let's say that I was just drawing something and it was going well. Now I've been working on my robot series, or maybe I'm working on a face like I am here in the background. What's funny about the face that's happening in the background too is I started just with drawing the eye and then slowly built the rest of the face around it because I was talking to a friend while I was drawing. And then about halfway through, I'm like, I didn't really worry about proportions or anything because I was only going to do the eye. So you'll see some adjustments later on. But let's say I was working on something that was going pretty well. In the back of my mind, I always assume that I'm going to do just as well the next thing that I jump to. And of course, that's not true. It can't be true, right? You get really good at drawing figures and then all of a sudden have this misnomer in your mind that, well, I'm good at drawing people now, so I should be able to jump over and draw a bear. Well, no, probably not. You're probably going to handle the pieces of the bear that overlap and correlate to drawing figures, but that's not a ton of a bear. They've got similar anatomy, though it's under a lot of chunky fur, and fur is very difficult. But I can find myself not thinking about that when I move in, and I get disappointed because things don't turn out the way that I wanted. So if this is you, I certainly empathize. I need recognition and validation far less than I desire results. I want to step away from a piece and be satisfied with it. Add it to the stack, be able to shove something into a spreadsheet and be happy with the progress that is being made. This is where burnout kicks in for me. If I run into a slew of pieces and none of them quite end up the way I want, or worse, I work on one piece for a very long time and it doesn't turn out, I find myself very disappointed. It's very easy for my mathematical brain to go down this train of thought of, well, 4 out of the last 10 pieces didn't turn out. So that means that the next piece has a 40% chance of not turning out. And that I don't like those odds. That's not I'm not in a real good spot with this. Now, of course, that's not exactly how it works because that's not measuring out, well, were the last 4 things that you did really, really difficult? And were they new? Were they done as pieces or were they done as practice? There's a lot of different factors that come in, but we often don't give ourselves the break there. We don't give ourselves a lot of grace in those situations. We just feel what we feel and kind of sit in that terribleness. It's hard to escape from this situation. There's a little bit of hopelessness that sets in, but you have to keep moving forward to understand what is happening emotionally, acknowledge it, and then move on. Sometimes burnout simply pops up because there is too much stress coming from other areas in your life. If finances are tight for whatever reason, it's easy to lose your patience with your artwork. This might happen all the more readily if you make art for a living, in whole or in part. If you need your art to make you money, man, what a wonderful, terrible situation to find yourself in. If you lose the purpose of your art, the beauty it brings into the world, the joy it brings to you, it can be hard to continue to produce. And if you need to produce to be able to buy cereal, that's tough. Financial concerns are a real issue for burnout. Mental health can also easily push you over the edge when it comes to burnout as well. Struggling with depression or any of the other common mental struggles can gouge out whatever small quantities of motivation you still cling to. Taking care of yourself as an artist is absolutely crucial to your longevity on the journey. I have a whole podcast on this topic if you'd like to check it out, but the stripped down version is essentially you have to treat yourself as a human and realize that you are valuable. Make sure you eat well, you sleep well, and you prioritize your joy and your mental stability. There is no shame in seeking help, no shame in medications, no shame in therapy. Take care of yourself so you can take care of those that matter to you, and so you can focus on the things that are important to you. This includes your art. Isolation can lead to burnout as well for several different reasons. First of all, when you are isolated, you lack context. It's easy to think you are moving too slowly, that your work is no good if you have no other humans to talk to, no one to bounce ideas off of. In addition, as humans, we are social creatures, and having too little social time can be extremely bad for us. Yes, I know most of you listening, myself included, are radical introverts, but we still need some manner of socialization. We cannot simply live in our dungeons forever. We need to see other people. I had a moment of this last week, actually, where I texted a couple of friends of mine after they had asked how I was doing, and I just truthfully said, I feel a little lonely today in a weird way. Almost like my social meter has just dipped to the point where I need a little bit of time with friends or people that care about me and people that matter to me. It's weird because I don't have these moments very frequently. I'm quite introverted, and my wife works from home, so it's at least the two of us most of the time, and then our daughter is here, obviously, when she's not at school or with her grandparents. And so we get decent amounts of social time, but they're not all the same in what they contribute, right? I think this is easier to attest to in that there are certain social situations, particularly family gatherings. If you have a family that doesn't all get along, those take extra social interaction. They are like 4 times the amount of hanging out with a friend, right? So, but yeah, I had this moment last week where I just kind of hit a point of, I'm a little lonely. I feel a little bit unsocial, whatever that means for me. It's not a common thing. Is this what extroverts feel like every time they don't hang out with people for more than 24 hours? Doesn't sound pleasant. In a lot of ways, other people can help pull us out of our burnout episodes, either by forcing us to engage in other things or by offering encouragement. All of this kind of exists under that umbrella of stress, these random different areas in our lives that can contribute to stress. Whether it's our finances, our mental health, isolation, and of course there's myriad more issues, but again, I don't want to spend forever talking about the negative things. We do have a couple more things we got to hit on before we move on to solutions, though. A lack of balance in life is the next one that I'd like to talk about. I talk about this a lot on the channel, actually, often hearkening back to Aristotle and how much focus he put on trying to find the mean, the middle between two extremes. Balance is important, though. And we as artists have a tendency to bounce back and forth between things, holding only loosely to any semblance of balance. We will take weeks off of our artwork, only to dive back in and do nothing but art for a week, and then remarkably, we burn out. Seek to work with your art in balance, to keep it as a frequent component of your life. Even if you only manage to get a few minutes in daily, that's likely far better for your psyche than diving in with reckless abandon only once a month. Obviously, we all are pretty different here when it comes to being people and artists and humans and all these other random categories we fit into. But try to pursue balance. And when you find that you're out of balance, take a little bit of time and try to find a way to get back to homeostasis. Finally here, before moving on to dealing with and avoiding burnout, we have criticism. Many people, far more than I like to admit, are kept from their artwork or driven to burnout with exceptional speed by the wayward comments and critiques of others. People are not always kind, and sometimes they are simply careless with their words. But if you get the wrong piece of feedback, metabolize something incorrectly, or simply find yourself on the receiving end of someone's response to a bad day, it can be crippling. I know far too many examples of people who have given up on their artwork for a time, or forever, because of the negative comments they have absorbed from other people. Be careful here. Remember, your worth does not come from the opinions of others. You are an artist, and art is important. But more than that, you are important as a human being. So how do we deal with burnout? I'd like to start with what I'm going to call acute fixes. These are things that you can do in the moment if you find yourself right now experiencing burnout and need to labor to fix that situation. In the long run, it's likely better to try and prevent it from occurring in the first place, but reality is often cruel. So let's take a look at some strategies for dealing with it in the moment. The first is take a break. This is perhaps the best and most immediate thing you can do, and probably not surprising if you've been listening to the podcast up until this point. Here's the catch. You will probably do it anyway. But, and this is a big thing, if you plan on the break, if you do it as a preservation technique, as something that you decided to do, you will not feel as bad or as guilty about it. In truth, there's no need to feel bad about it. Taking a break, walking away when you have been compromised is a great strategy for many areas in your life. Especially with something as emotionally entrenched as art, taking a few minutes or even a few weeks away from the thing that burns you out can give whatever part of you needs to heal the time to do so. It is easy to feel guilty when you take a break. I've known many people in my life who never seem to give themselves breaks, either worried that it will kill their momentum or hard enough on themselves that they don't feel like they've earned it. I ran into this a lot with my colleagues while I was teaching. People who felt like what they were doing was good, humane, and noble work, which I would agree teaching generally is. But the problem is that they let themselves then fall into the trap of thinking that they couldn't take a break, that they hadn't earned it yet, that even though they maybe had earned it, they couldn't do it because the kids would be there and the kids wouldn't get what they need. But there's a faulty logic to this, especially in that scenario, because if you never take a break, if you never let yourself recover, eventually you're going to burn out, you're going to fall into a pit of depression and recovery, and you're going to be in a situation where you're of no use, no help to anyone. And maybe that can't be avoided. But if you take care of yourself, if you take breaks, if you understand that you are human, that you can't be a superhuman that lasts forever in that particular capacity, then you can at least have some foresight as to when that's going to happen. And I think there is a good chance that you can avoid that kind of burnout entirely. Now, artists stumble into this as well, thinking that, no, I need to keep moving forward. I need to catch up with this other artist. I need to complete this within this amount of time. And then don't give yourself any breaks. And the reality is, a human being cannot go at anything forever. And here's the thing. A break isn't necessarily something to earn. It's an integral part of working, of taking something on for the long haul. In almost all situations, you will burn yourself out if you never allow yourself to take some time off. So take a break. Walk away for a few, and don't come back until you've taken some time to think things through. Maybe try to figure out what went awry, why you found yourself in the state of burnout in the first place. You've earned the break, and it's efficient. Take some time off. Seek support, or open up to somebody about the situation. Community is really important for us as artists, and sometimes the simple realization that you are not the only one who has felt like this before is a godsend. Chances are, if you are in an artistic community and mention that you are feeling burnt out, you will immediately be hit with responses of, oh yeah, me too, or, I totally know what you mean, that was me 6 months ago. It's probably more rare to find an artist who has not experienced some kind of burnout than one that has. The art journey is rough and the journey is long. It simply takes so much time that you are bound to run into some roadblocks at some point, and burnout is as common on that road as traffic cones. So try opening up to some people, letting them know what is going on in your head and how you're feeling, and try to remember that your feelings are valid and important. They're a piece of you and they make you human. If you aren't currently a part of an artistic community, you can always feel free to join our Discord community. I try to keep links to it in each of the major videos. It's a small community where we can support one another and work to better our skills through critique of whatever level you desire. Making yourself vulnerable by sharing your position and your thoughts with other people can be healing, and other people can help you through the process. In addition, there are likely others who are scared to open up, and your vulnerability can make it feel safe for them to do so. One word of caution here, though. You likely know the people in your world best. So make sure that if you are choosing to be vulnerable, you are choosing to do so with people that are safe. Not all humans are safe. And sometimes some might be, but you haven't figured it out yet for sure. You're just not 100% sure. So protect yourselves. Make sure that you are only opening up and only being vulnerable with people where it's going to be a safe environment for you. Give yourself the permission and freedom to make messy or gross artwork. As you dive back into art, try to take a break from your normal work, whatever that might be. Give yourself permission, freedom even, to make playful art. Get some messy supplies or just something different from your normal and dive in. I mentioned gross in the beginning of this, but gross I don't mean in like disgusting. I mean mostly in something that gets your hands dirty. If maybe you're like me, you don't like getting your hands dirty, but when you play around with something, mess often happens. And sometimes that mess can be freeing, psychologically even taking you back to childhood, where messy happened more frequently. I've talked about this kind of thing in several sketchbook sessions and in several freestanding videos as well. But there is a lot to be said for making messy or ugly drawings or artwork. It lowers the stress when your expectations are limited to simply making marks on the page and experimenting. So give it a try. Give yourself permission to try new things, to make some messy art. Marshall Vandriff, who's a wonderful artist, he is part of the Draftsman podcast on the Proco channel, and then it did separate out at one point and become just the Draftsman podcast YouTube channel here on YouTube, on the platform. Marshall Vandriff is a wonderful teacher. I've taken several of his classes, and at one point in one of their podcasts, he was talking about the fact that he was getting himself too tense, too wrapped up in his drawings in this kind of perfectionistic state. So he specifically bought a sketchbook just for messy, ugly drawings. And I think he only allowed himself to use ink in that sketchbook. He would just make these really quick, messy drawings, and he was okay with it. This sketchbook was set aside to do that. I love this idea. I haven't done it yet, but I've got a couple more sketchbooks I want to finish, and then I want to start allocating sketchbooks again to what I always dreamed about doing, which is sketchbooks with a single purpose. When I've done this in the past, I get bottlenecked and I start freaking out of like, I can't do anything unless in this one unless it's perfect. But I think I'm finally at the point now where I can just have 3 or 4 sketchbooks. Like this one's for birds, this one's for weekly studies on the Discord channel, this one's for watercolor, this one's just for messy, this one's for whatever I want. I think that last one's probably the most important, is you just need to have one sketchbook that's for whatever the heck you want. But I love this idea of having a sketchbook where it's just for experimentation. Like the expectation is never that you're going to get a good drawing out of there. And even for me, who shows most of my work here online, maybe the expectation there is that I don't even show, this to my online folk, to my audience. I probably would, but I would probably do it from the mentality of I'm not going to do that. I think that Marshall's idea there is great, to have this sketchbook that is just allocated specifically toward experimenting and messy artwork. Sometimes time trials and things like that can be really good to include in these, where you just give yourself a minute to do these kinds of drawings. They're really good for experimenting, but they're really good for like grabbing gestural knowledge as well. They're just not pretty. And if you have this idea in your head that your sketchbook needs to be pretty, that can be kind of crippling as you try to move through it. Alternatively, engage in playful art as you move back into art making. It's on that same train of thought, but try to do things that are specifically playful. Try to get back into that same energy that you imbibed of when you were younger, when you were a first burgeoning artist, whether that was you at 6 or maybe you at 27. It doesn't matter. Pretty much when any of us started drawing, it was just exciting, or started painting. I often mention drawing as just the go-to, but really that's because that's where most people start. You could start with any form of art. But any of us who go back to when we started making art in a with really concerted effort, it was fun. Otherwise we wouldn't have stuck with it, unless we were pressured into it, like piano lessons for a kid or something. But try to go back to when it was fun. Try to go back to making things playful. For me, this is probably drawing and painting with my daughter, where I have very little in the way of expectations. But it's also working with like Sharpies on cardboard boxes and things like that. Just stuff where it's hard to have any expectations on a professional adult level, and it's just playful. But it gets you back into that mindset of making things and having fun. Consider copying. Sometimes we have this idea that that is a bad thing to do, but most of us probably got started making artwork copying and emulating other artists. So maybe just go back to copying somebody else's artwork. For me, this is really low stress when I do it digitally. A lot of the work early on the channel was actually things from Monster Hunter or video games, and I was just copying these reference images, learning how they were constructed, how the creatures were put together. It's low stress for me. I enjoy doing it. And the nice part with digital is that you can constantly move and warp things. But watercolor and gouache allow for a lot of that too. Acrylic is really forgiving in that way if you wanted to kind of go down that route. But the point here is just try to get back to doing things that are playful. It's a really great strategy if you find yourself burnt out. Because if you're burnt out, it's kind of like play is almost the opposite of whatever pulled you into burnout in the first place. Finally, if you find that you are able, try to focus on things that you are thankful for. Try to have some gratitude. This might seem trite, but in my own life, especially in my 30s, I have found that I have far more control over my own perspective of things than I ever thought. I can decide to be thankful for the tough days, or at the very least, thankful during the tough days for other things. I'm sick right now, my voice is still recovering, and we've had some waves of sickness coming through our home for quite a while, and it's been hard. But I try to wake up each day and forcibly remind myself that life is pretty good. I have a wonderful family. It's beautiful outside with spring finally turning the land from this dull yellow into a wonderful verdant green. If you can, try to focus on things that you appreciate in life, the things you are thankful for. This can be the remedy for so many situations. It's tough and it might sound silly, but trust me, it works. Okay, so those were some of the acute fixes to the situation if you find yourself currently burnt out. But what about preventing it in the first place? Ideally, we could find a structure that would allow us to keep working indefinitely. While I doubt this is feasible, I think staving off burnout as long as possible might be a more genuine goal. So how can we do that? Set boundaries. The older I get, the more important I realize these are. Set boundaries in your relationships, at work, with family, and with your art. If you disallow every area of your life to bleed over into every other, you can protect art time. Work has this treacherous habit of invading our personal life. Now, you might have a job where there's no way to get around that, but in most occupations, you can find a way to step away once you're outside of the office, once you've closed your computer for the day. And it's important. It's important if you're spending time with your family to make sure that that time with your family is just that. It's important if you're spending time with your partner to make sure that the time is just that, with your friends, etc., etc. Likewise, try to set boundaries around and with your art time. It can be just as easy to let your art time bleed over into other things, to claim more time than it ought to, or to keep you from important things. I think we have all had a moment where we kept drawing and forgot to take the laundry out, or pull the turkey out of the oven, or forgot to get the mail because of what we were working on. It happens. We are often so immersed in what we were doing that it's easy to just keep doing it. So set some boundaries for your art time, but also keep your art time safe. Keep it sacred. A lot of times in life, if you make your needs known to the other people you live with, whether this is a spouse and family or it's your parents because you're still living at home, if you make your needs known, I need 1 hour a day to work on my artwork and I really would like not to be bothered if that's at all possible, mother. Most people in your life will probably try to make sure that that's met in some capacity. Now, they won't always know. In fact, frequently they won't understand or know what you really mean. But most people have something like this. A lot of people come home from work and they need a little bit of time to detox. I often get to the end of my day and I need a little bit of time to play some video games and just let my brain do nothing and turn into mush for half an hour before I go to sleep. Most humans need this in some way. A lot of people in America do it while they watch football or basketball or any other of the myriad sports that I don't pay attention to because I just simply forget to. But most people do this, and if you make your needs known to the people that you're living with, there's a really good chance that they'll not understand necessarily, but they'll understand that it's important for you, and they might heed that in some capacity. Now, this isn't always going to be the case, but it's a really good place to start. You can at least give the people that you live with the opportunity to make your life easier in that way. If at all possible, make sure you have a physical space set up for your art making. This allows you to always come back, and if you just have 10 or 15 minutes and that's all that you have today to get into something, you can do that. I often keep a lot of stuff just at the dining room table. I have the freedom to do this because, I'm an adult, but I've got my studio, but I only do probably 50% of my work in there. Most of my work is upstairs. That way my wife and my daughter are pretty close by. And, if I need to take a couple minutes to get dinner together, or I need to clean the kitchen, or I need to step in and help with something, or the cat jumped up and is in the sink and is creating a mess, there's a lot of things that I can jump into just being close to everyone else, being in close proximity. So I like to keep several spaces set up. I have the luxury to do that. But in whatever capacity you can, I would highly recommend that you just have an area that always has your stuff ready to go. It has your sketchbook out, maybe not open, so people don't peek and look through your stuff, because we all pretty much hate that. But you have your markers, your pens, your paints, whatever it is, set up, ready to go at a moment's notice. Take frequent breaks. This banks off of what we talked about earlier. Breaks are necessary and important, and are not just a tool to implement when crisis strikes. Set timers for yourself. Get up from your art. Go on a walk at work if you can. Just take a break. We are finite corporeal beings. We need to take care of our minds and our bodies, and we can do so in some small part by making sure we don't grind ourselves away to nothing. I don't need to belabor this point, we talked about it earlier. Let's move on to something else I mentioned earlier though. Practice artistic self-care. Take care of yourself proactively. Reward yourself for the time you invest. Let yourself play. Have fun with your artwork. Rest enough, eat well, all the stuff you encourage everyone else in your life to do, but you don't do for yourself. We as artists, as introverts, are often so very good about telling everyone around us how they can take care of themselves and supporting them in that. But we need to do the same for ourselves. So if you have people in your life that you love and you try to tell them to go to sleep on time and eat well and make sure they exercise and all these things that we all know all of us should do, but you find that you don't do that, try to employ your own advice. Try to take that advice that you give to all the people you love and utilize it yourself. I won't spend a ton of time here, so check out the podcast on artistic self-care if you'd like. It has a lot more in-depth things talking about the psychology of artists and some of our needs. Celebrate achievements, no matter how small. This is a huge one. Every win needs to be celebrated, so whenever you accomplish something, lean into it. Find an excuse to get excited, to feel good about yourself. Share your pieces with other artists, with encouraging people in your life. If you know your father thinks your art is silly, don't keep showing him. Go to the older sister who loves everything that you do. A huge part of our Discord server is celebrating with each other, sharing our funny little drawings, the cute things, the funny things, the bad things, and the things that we are excited about. A lot of joy can come from sharing with other people by celebrating your wins. At the end of the day, though, choose to find satisfaction in your own wins because they are yours, not because others give you a nice feedback about it. Your success is great, and you deserve to feel good about it. Avoid procrastination. Goodness, this is a huge one. One of the easiest ways to rob yourself of joy when it comes to art is procrastinating. Now, obviously, this lends itself to due dates, the things you have from classes or from commissions or from work. If you are a hobby artist, this is likely easier to avoid. But in most cases, staying away from procrastination will only aid you in holding on to your joy. If you can, simply work ahead, getting the sketches and mental pieces out of the way early. These are often the hardest parts because they are the unknowns. Once you start working through the ideas, you usually have some semblance of an idea how the project is actually going to go. The next thing is set realistic goals. Now, I've talked a lot on this channel about it, and instead of rambling for another 15 minutes about goals, I'm just going to direct you to an associated video. That'll be in the description down below if that's an important thing to you. In short, setting realistic goals just makes sure that your expectations are known, they're achievable, and you have clear win conditions. We're always looking to win. We often beat ourselves up when we feel like things aren't going well, but well is hard to define if we haven't sat down and have a concrete goal. So that's it in short. If you want some more information on that, go check it out. The next thing is community. Community is super important for us as artists, and it is a good preventative measure for getting away from burnout. Largely, this is because the things that lead to burnout are often very internalized. And if you have people that you can chat with, A, you understand you're not the only one experiencing this, but B, you actually have the chance to get some hints, some tips, some encouragement that might help you avoid that dip at all. I've talked about our Discord server several times. It is not the end-all be-all. It is a wonderful community that we are building, and if you are looking for some artistic community, I would highly recommend that you get yourself involved. The older I get, the more I understand that you need to have a community around you as a creator who understands the intricacies of what you're doing, just to maintain a high level of endurance, resilience, and joy in whatever it is that you're doing. In addition to everything that you see here and everything that happens on the Discord server, I'm working on writing a novel, and that's kind of an isolating, odd thing. But I have a local writing group that I'm a part of. We meet once a week. We all just sit there and we write for an hour in silence, and then we kind of hang out and we chat about things. It's wonderful. Just that much accountability has allowed me to put so much time into my work. And there are people that just seem to understand things about me as a human being and the need and desire I have to write this thing that other people just don't get. The same thing happens with us as artists. the more that I delve into the art community on Discord, to all my friends that I've had over the years who all work on the same kinds of things or just have that same desire, the more I understand that that's not that weird. There's a lot of people out there who have these same tendencies, these same needs and desires, and there's just that wonderful overlap that you get. It's that sense of community, and it matters. And I think, though I'm not sure, I think it might be more important for artists than it is for other groups of people. Well, as always, thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. I hope that this discussion about burnout has been helpful in some way. Mostly, I hope that it's been validating, that you understand that these are the causes that might get you there, that you're not that weird, that you're not a failure for finding yourself in that place. And if you don't experience burnout very frequently, then I hope that some of the strategies and preventative things we talked about here will be helpful for you. As I mentioned several times in the video, we have a Discord server, and if you would like to check it out, it's going to be in the link below. Thanks to patron Who, What, Where, When for your continued support. And if you would like to be involved in the channel, if you would like to support the channel in some way, see the scripts before they go live, vote on future podcasts and discussion items, and just be able to help us out in some way here at the platform, you can check out the Patreon link below as well. Well, have a good one, y'all. See you soon.